Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Your book and your journey is genuinely one of the most shocking stories I have ever read. You lived a life that many people should not have emerged out of.
Right.
Right? You talk very early on in the book about how you grew up in a world that your therapist referred to as basically growing up in a combat zone. What does that mean?
It means there was a lot of gun violence in my neighborhood. I buried 5 of my friends before the age of 17. I lost family members. My brother was shot. My cousin was gunned down in front of my house. And this stuff was happening every couple of months.
Right. And you lived in this world where there was not only violence on the outside, but violence on the inside as well. Because you talk about in the book, and it's really heart-wrenching, about how your mom was physically abused by your dad at the time, who was a policeman.
Right.
How did that affect your world? I mean, because you're growing up in this world where there's so much violence, and then you have this man who's a policeman, who is creating even more violence in your world.
So he was my stepfather, though. But my mom was dating him. It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare, and it started out verbal abuse, and then it just became physical. And because he was a police officer, when my mom would call the police, they wouldn't do anything.
Right. Did that change your perception of police? Because most kids grow up thinking the police are heroes.
Yeah, I actually wanted to be a police officer. I'm a little embarrassed to admit that now, but police. I mean, officer friendly. They would come to the school, and it was it was a role that I wanted to play. And then, my experiences growing up, at least in my neighborhood, it was just a negative experience.
You then go on to talk about how you went into a world where crime was basically the only avenue that was open up to you.
Right.
You get into a life of crime as a young kid, I think at 14.
Yes.
And by the time you are 16, you're deep into it, and you get sentenced to life in prison.
Yes.
At the age of 17?
17, yeah.
17 years old, sentenced to life in prison. What is going through your mind when that's happening? When that verdict comes down, what is happening in your brain?
It was like receiving a death sentence. And as you can imagine, going to prison is like being teleported to another planet. And and I only weighed like 120 pounds. So I was like super terrified of going into prison as a child, being charged as an adult, and having to grow old and die there. And so I was terrified.
And what had you been arrested for?
First-degree murder.
Right. And so now you lived in this world of violence. You're a 17-year-old who's been sentenced to life in prison. You go into prison. This is a story that seems like it's ended now.
Right.
And yet that is just the beginning of the story in this book.
Right.
Genuinely one of the most amazing stories ever, because you set goals for yourself, you get into prison, and then you decide that you're going to make your life better in prison.
Right.
Why?
So I knew growing up, my mom had instilled in me that I was a good person. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. And like growing up playing chess and playing the cello, people in my neighborhood was like, man, that's not cool, man. You don't do that. So I never really applied myself. And so once I was finally, I was sentenced to life in prison, and everyone was like, just get comfortable, you're gonna grow old and die there. I knew in my heart that I was a good person. So I wanted to write up a plan and apply myself and prove to myself and prove to everyone else that my life was redeemable.
Right. And when you were in prison, did you feel like prison helped you believe that your life was redeemable?
No. Prison, like it was mostly punitive, and they were telling me, get comfortable, you were gonna grow old and die there. But there were people that I met in prison who actually saw potential in me and gave me hope that I can get out.
Right, you talk about one of your cellmates who forced you to learn math.
Yeah.
And he would punish you if you couldn't get the answers right. I mean, which is, a great way to learn math.
Right, yeah.
Like, be in a prison cell with someone and be like, I'm gonna learn. I'm gonna learn my 4 times table. I will learn this.
Yeah,
that's an interesting way to learn,
It's really interesting, right? Love this guy to death. He would give me math problems, and he would say, I'm gonna give you this problem, and you need to beat your time, and if you can't do it, you either gotta drink a cup of water, or you gotta do 25 push-ups.
Right.
So I put on a lot of muscle, and then like push-ups. But also got my high school diploma in like 2 months.
Right. Now you talk about this journey. And when you went into prison, it was a life sentence.
Yes.
Right? But then you get out after how many years?
16 and a half years.
And that for many people is the beginning of an ending, because you are now a felon.
Right.
You are now someone who society has deemed dangerous. You are somebody who has been found guilty of first-degree murder.
Right.
Where do you even begin your journey now?
So throughout my prison sentence, I knew that society would look at me that way.
Right.
And I would see a lot of people get out of prison and come back in prison. And so I had in my mind, you know, kind of like a mental fortitude that I was going to be able to get out there and just work really hard to prove people wrong. And then oftentimes, we always hear the stories about people getting out and committing another crime.
Right.
And so I wanted to prove everybody wrong by showing that we can come home and be successful.
This, what was interesting, and this is fascinating about Chris's story, is you went into prison being what many people would consider the worst of society.
Right.
And in that time, you go in, you study. What are all the achievements that you did for yourself in prison? Just listening, because it's really impressive.
So first I got my high school diploma. I got my college degree in sociology.
Right.
I taught myself to read and write and speak in Spanish, Italian, went on to learn Mandarin, started book club, started career center. And on and on and on and on. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And just,
So I mean, you come out with all these skills. You got into the real world, but the real world doesn't appreciate a person who has rehabilitated themselves. We've learned this
Not
in
at all.
society. We're trying to change that, but we have learned that. You start going into business. You want to become a business person, but banks
Right.
don't want to give you loans. So how do you even begin that journey of getting the money? How does that work?
So it's actually very, very strange too. Like going into banks, my companies, when I started my first company, it was profitable. I was making, you know, like $20,000 a month. And I would go into the bank and say, I need a $5,000 line of credit. And like every bank like told me no. And eventually I found out it was because I was a convicted felon.
Right.
And so it just made it very difficult for me to be successful. And that's what happens to a lot of people when they come home from prison. It's like you want to do the right thing and doors just shut everywhere you turn. And so it's very, very, very difficult.
And now you've decided to make that part of your purpose. What does
Yes.
your company do, and how do you work with people who have come out of prison?
So I started my first company, which is a furniture design company, making high-end furniture. I started a second company, construction contracting company, and both of my companies, I didn't know it at the time when I was in prison, but I wanted to create opportunities for people. And so I now know the term social entrepreneur, but I create job opportunities for people who need help the most. And so I'm you know, very proud of the work I've done since I've been in Baltimore.
Someone who is pro, you know, a punitive system might say, Chris, clearly America's prison system works because you went in as a murderer and then you came out as a model citizen. Right. Isn't that what the prison system is supposed to do? How would you respond to that?
So I will push back on that, right? So, but it all depends on who you ask. Some people think the prison systems are working fine. They're decimating communities of people of color, but you know, I think that the prison system is broken, and it didn't help me. I had to really like push myself to learn all I can. And even when I finished vocational sharp, got my high school diploma, I read hundreds and hundreds of books.
Right.
But the other thing I would say too is, you know, we got to think about what we're doing to our children. I went to prison as a child, and you know, my brain wasn't developed. You know, my life was threatened, and I took a person's life, and that's wrong, right? But my life shouldn't have been thrown away. And you know, as a society, we should be more thoughtful of giving children who commit crimes a second chance. And so I dedicated my life to being a voice for them.
If you go back in your life and you look at that decision that you made to take somebody else's life, what do you think could have changed in your community that could have prevented you from getting into the life that you did?
I mean, there's a lot of things, right, in my neighborhood. Like one, like the crack epidemic that swept through my neighborhood. Our teachers were underpaid. There was a lot of crime. There were so many things. I can't really say what a magical solution would have been, but I guess like the shortest answer would have been like my mom. If my mom had like more support, like my mom was sexually assaulted in front of me, and as a victim, I watched her slip downhill. And there was no help for her. Even watching all my friends die, there was no one to come talk to me and say, how you feeling about like watching your friend die? They would just say, it'll be okay. And I would think about these images every day, and I couldn't concentrate in school. I couldn't like function. I had to sleep on the floor because stray bullets would go through our house. And so it's tough, and a lot of children grow up like that. And so I want to be a voice to speak out against these conditions and continue to do so.
When you look at people who've come out of prison now, do you try and tell them the importance of speaking to someone? Do you tell them the importance of therapy? Do you try and get them into that?
So that's something that's very, very important. I talk about this in the book. There's like 30-something things that you can do when implementing your own master plan.
Right.
And like the first one is like, man, write that shit down, right? Write it down, and give like someone else like a copy of your list so they can hold you accountable. And like me, I did my grandmother, because like no one like, you know, you always obey your grandmother, right?
Right.
I had other things like, you know, create your own personal board of advisors, right? So someone who's like an expert in like finance or like, you know, relationships, and you just take them out for lunch like once a month. And you just do stuff like that. And like finally, just like never quit, never give up, and surround yourself with like positive people that push you. And often people say, you know, your story is amazing, and maybe it is, but there's nothing special about me. I only made it this far because a handful of people saw potential in me and pushed me to make me believe that I could be successful, and it's still like this to this day.
I disagree, man. I think your story is very special. I think you're an amazing guy. It's not a perfect story, and that's what makes it perfect to talk about. The Master Plan, an amazing story, an amazing book, is available now. Chris Wilson, everybody.